What is up, everybody? It's Dante Guardi back at it with the Utah Utes Football Digest. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the Utah versus Oregon State game from my perspective and also giving you a sports betting pick at the end. So far, we are 3-0 on our bets this season. We cashed the first half under for the Utah Florida game, the Baylor team total under in the Baylor game. And last week, the under, I believe the line was 48.5 for the Utah UCLA game. That was an easy, no sweat winner. Utah ends up winning 14-7. No matter what line you got for that under, it was a no doubt, no sweat, easy winner. Like I said, for this week, the Utes are going to be taking on Oregon State. So let's just dive right into it with the Utes offense versus the Oregon State defense. Oregon State gave up 38 points last week to Washington State. Cameron Ward absolutely lit them up. He averaged over 10 yards per pass, had over 400 passing yards, and obviously Washington State scored 38 points, won the game. So they were able to do what they set out to do. Oregon State's defense, they lose a lot of guys in their secondary. I believe they lose four or maybe all of their starters from their absolutely elite secondary last season. The new guys, not a lot of experience, not a lot of talent back there. A lot of hiccups early in the season, especially last week where they just couldn't stop a nosebleed. And that Washington State passing attack is no joke. That was a matchup that I was really intrigued to watch. I personally picked Washington State to win that game. And the driving factor for that win was I thought that their air raid offense would just be too overwhelming for an Oregon State secondary that doesn't have a lot of experience or talent, like I said. And now they play Utah. Utah's got a much different offense. They're going to approach this game much differently than Washington State is. A lot less aggressive and a lot more run heavy would be the two main points of emphasis where Utah's offense differs from Washington State's. But with Utah's rushing attack, it's going to be led by Jalen Glover, Jaquin Jackson likely out for the foreseeable future, and Mekhi Bernard, as we know, suffered a scooter incident and is going to be out for the season. So it's going to be Jalen Glover handling the load for the Utah rushing attack. And I think he's a capable player. He's shown the ability to handle a heavy workload a few times throughout the early junctures of his career. He had 20 carries in a road win against Washington State last season, carried the ball 25 times against UCLA last week. So he's got some experience. However, this is going to be the first time in his career that he's really had a full week of prep to be the starting running back. You look at last week, he was kind of thrown into the fire after Jaquin Jackson went down with that injury. And even last year at Washington State, that was a Utah team that was expecting to have Cameron Rising. They were expecting to have Tavion Thomas as well. I believe they were expecting to have a lot more help than they actually did when they started that game. If you remember, it was on Fox Sports 1, and the announcers were just as confused as the audience was in terms of why so many Utah players were not playing. Utah still ended up winning, and Jalen Glover was a big part of that. I believe that he's a player that will be able to average around 4.5 yards per carry in this game if he does play well. This is an Oregon State front seven that loses some key pieces as well. They lose Kyrie Fisher-Morris and Omar Spates, both of their linebackers who were the kind of the glue of that defense last year. They were stout in coverage as well as against the run. So I mean, those are two key contributors that you no longer have, two vocal leaders as well in the locker room. This is an Oregon State defense that is just simply a lot less talented and a lot less experienced. They don't really have as much structure as they did last year, where it was more of a perfect storm in terms of the physicality of their offensive line matching with the just overall production level, experience level, and talent level of the defensive unit that they sported last year. It was really a perfect storm and made for an extremely physical football team. This year, you still have that with their offense, but their defense in general is just a lot less productive, a lot less kind of active, I guess is another word to say. They're going to be forcing less turnovers. They're going to be a lot less efficient and yards per play against both the run and the pass, in my opinion. So just some minor tendencies that don't really favor the Beavers in this game. Whereas I think that Utah is a lot more experienced up front. They're going to come in and try to establish their dominance early. I don't think they're going to be very dominant. Like, this is still a respectable Oregon State run defense, but I do think that Utah will be able to kind of do what they want against the Beavers for a large part of this game. And then that's going to reflect a lot in the passing game as well, where we've seen Nate Johnson look decent, especially throwing over the intermediate areas of the field. Whereas when it comes to those shorter screen passes, we've seen him kind of short arm those and not really flash a whole lot in the deep passing game. But I think that his intermediate passing is going to be very key in this game. Washington State's a team that also emphasizes intermediate passing. We saw Cam Ward absolutely light up this Beaver secondary last week. Like I said, this secondary is absolutely nothing special. I think Devon Vele, Money Parks, Mikey Matthews will all be able to generate more than enough separation against them. It's just going to be up to Nate Johnson to hit his throws, which I think he'll be able to do. Like I said, we've seen him do well making those throws over the middle, over the intermediate portions of the field, and I think that's an area of the field that Oregon State's going to struggle defending. And then I think Utah's going to be able to establish the run a little bit. Like I said, I think they'll be able to average between 4.5 yards per carry. Not an overly dominant performance, but a performance that will be good enough to get them in the red zone. And then at that point, it's just up to Nate Johnson to make the throws, because I do think that this Utah receiving corps is more than good enough to generate consistent separation against these Oregon State defenders. So I think Utah's offense is going to be able to move the ball decently well against Oregon State, not to the point where you're going to say, wow, Nate Johnson was fantastic. Not to the point where you're going to say Utah's so back, they're a lock to make the Pac-12 championship game, because of how great their offense looked against Oregon State. And now we can say that they're a pretty complete football team. Maybe not to that extent, but I do think that Utah will be able to move the ball a pretty decent amount. I think they'll be able to score somewhere between 21 and 27 points, maybe 21 and 28 points, somewhere in that area. They're going to score 3 to 4, maybe 5 times, something like that. A solid offensive performance, a performance that we're going to look back on and say was a very big building block for the rest of the season and Nate Johnson's progression as just simply a college football player. Now getting into the Oregon State offense versus the Utah defense. The forte of Oregon State's offense is their offensive line and Damian Martinez. That connection, that battery between the running back room of Oregon State and their offensive line is just too good to overlook. This has been consistently one of the best rushing attacks in the entire nation. They absolutely gashed Utah 2 seasons ago. That was a Utah team that won the Pac-12 conference. BJ Baylor and a lot of the players who make up this current Oregon State offensive line unit were a part of that team. That gave Utah their only conference loss of 2021. Very experienced unit, very physical unit. Their 2 offensive tackles. This is more of a pass blocking stat, but it kind of just reflects their overall level of play last season. Neither of them allowed a sack. I mean, this is just a very well-rounded, physical, well-coached group. So this is not a group that Utah can overlook by any means. And then I got to get into Damian Martinez as well, the reigning Pac-12 offensive freshman of the year, rushed for almost 1,000 yards last season as a true freshman. One of the most NFL-ready prospects in college football in general. I think not just at the running back position. You're looking at a player who is 6 feet tall and weighs over 230 pounds. Very similar frame to Jaquan Jackson. Jaquan's a little bit taller, but I mean, in terms of a running back, you're not going to see a lot of running backs that weigh 230 pounds, that flash the athleticism that players like Jaquan Jackson or Damian Martinez have in their arsenal. You look at Damian Martinez, just elite downhill speed. Once he gets going, it's quite literally impossible to bring this guy down with just one tackler. He just runs through opposing defenders. He averaged over 3.5 yards after contact last season. He's averaging over 4 yards after contact per carry this season. 6 foot, 232 pounds, great downhill speed, great physicality to his game. And like I said, once he really gets going, it's hard to stop him. I'm playing behind Oregon State offensive line that has been generating a fair amount of push against every opponent they've played over the past 3 seasons. I mean, this is just a match made in heaven for the Beavers, and it's really what makes their offense go. A lot of people in the offseason were talking about how big an addition DJ Uiagalelei was going to be for this offense. I personally wasn't really on board with that as much as other people were. I still thought it was going to be an upgrade given how bad their quarterback play was last year, but I really wasn't looking at that addition and saying, wow, Oregon State's a contender. It was more for me saying, wow, this offensive line and this running back are both extremely phenomenal, and it's going to be a plethora of a group. This group between the offensive line and Damian Martinez and the running backs in general have so many NFL prospects. It's just ridiculous, and they've really been clicking on all cylinders over the past few years. And Jonathan Smith has also done a very good job of retaining his assistants. Not a lot of them are leaving for other jobs, so he's really done a good job developing a culture at Oregon State. And every player that they've gotten over the last few years has just blossomed into a pretty darn good football player. And we've seen that happening with players on their offensive line and within their running back room. And then as for passing, I don't really love Oregon State's passing attack. I'm going to be quite honest. You look at DJ Uiagalelei, he's a player who's really struggled under pressure, dating back to his time at Clemson. And then you look at the wide receivers. What was DJ's biggest issue at Clemson? It was his ability to hit receivers accurately. You look at the receivers that he has at Oregon State, his top 2, Silas Bolden, and then I'm not quite sure what the other one's name is, but they're both 5'8". That's not super intriguing. That's not great for a quarterback that has had a plethora of accuracy issues in the past. I think they're going to be better than they were last year, but I don't really think they pose much of a threat to this Utah secondary, which has looked pretty dang good this season when you take into account Sione Vaki and Cole Bishop on the back end and how good Teo Johnson's been in the slot, and then also the length that they have at corner with Zemiah Vaughn, Miles Battle. And this is a Utah secondary that just checks all the boxes. Extremely high IQ football players, extremely talented football players. You take into account the speed of both of the safeties as well as a player like Lander Barton in the middle. I mean, there's just a lot to like with this Utah defense, and I don't think DJ Uiagalelei is a player that's really going to expose Utah secondary, and I don't think that these receivers are really that great to the point where they're going to be making life easy for DJ Uiagalelei. I think Utah secondary kind of takes over this game and really limits Oregon State from converting on a third and longs and in the red zone, which is what I'm going to get into right now, explaining the line. You got Oregon State as a 4-point favorite currently. You got the line or you got the over under at 44 and a half, which is awfully low. So now we're going to get into my best bet. With that line, though, you can see why the line is so short at 44 and a half. Utah versus UCLA only was 21 points. Utah versus Florida was 35 points. Utah versus Baylor was 33 points. Utah versus Weber State was 38 points, if I'm counting those correctly in my head. So none of Utah's games have gone over 44 and a half. So why do I like the over 44 and a half in this game? Personally, I think Oregon State's be able to move the ball somewhat efficiently. I think they'll be able to establish a little bit of a rushing attack. I think both these teams will be able to look back on their rushing performances and say, okay, we did a decent job given our opponent, given our circumstances. I think both these teams will be averaging somewhere between 4 and 4.5 yards per carry. Neither of these teams really turn the ball over a ton either. Damian Martinez certainly does not fumble very often. DJ Uiagalelei, for as indecisive as he's been and as unproductive as he's been over the past few years, he's actually done a pretty decent job of not turning the ball over. And I think Utah will eventually get a turnover, maybe two, and I think they'll win the turnover battle. But I don't think that Oregon State's a team that's really going to be putting the ball in danger a ton and giving Utah a plethora of opportunities to capitalize on what they do. I think both teams will be able to run the ball efficiently, get it to third and manageable, convert some third downs, and score in the red zone as well. I think Utah more so than Oregon State. I just think that Utah's red zone defense is exponentially better than the Beavers is. Not saying that Oregon State's terrible or that they won't be able to stop Utah in the red zone. They definitely have the potential to. It's just up to, we'll see. That's not really an aspect of the game I'm super confident kind of analyzing. That's going to be more of a wait and see thing. But I do think that Utah's defense in the red zone is absolutely stellar and will be able to stifle Oregon State quite often. So once again, I think both teams will be able to move the ball. I think both teams will score a couple of touchdowns. And this is a really, really low total. I think Utah will end up winning this game, but probably by a score of about 27-21, 27-24, something like that, something really kind of lowish scoring. And if there is a turnover, I think both these teams have more than enough potential to capitalize on those turnovers, especially with a short field. Like I said, I think that they'll both be able to run the ball fairly well. And with that being said, I think they'll both put themselves in position for some points. I think Utah wins this game. I think it's gonna be a close one. I'm not like overly confident about it. This is a short week, maybe a trap spot as well. Oregon State's hungry for a win coming off of an emotional loss. But then again, that could also lead to a letdown spot. You never really know how to evaluate these teams, especially this early in the season. I'm going to lay off with the spread, though. It's very kind of a mixed bag this week, especially given the uncertainty at quarterback for Utah. And feels like a little bit of a trap line with Oregon State being a 4-point favorite over a team that's ranked 9 spots ahead of them. But I do like the total. We've been dabbling in a lot of totals this season. I like the over here. I think both teams will be able to move the ball somewhat efficiently. I think a lot of people are going to be betting on the under as well this week. So a nice little public fade as well, which is not a bad spot to have. So like I said, I like the over 44.5 this week. Hopefully we can make it 4-0 on best bets that I've given out on the show. Thank y'all for tuning in, and hopefully we can cash another winner, and we'll see you next week.